Hi, I'm Mika. I'm Northern Shoshone and part of the Wolf Clan of the Hutu-Huron, which are the Selkirk First Nations in the Yukon. I currently live in Calgary, Alberta. I was in Montana for a little bit, but I had to come home for work reasons. In my culture, we always begin with where we're from and who our family is and our ancestors and our land acknowledgement. And when I read Beowulf for the first time, I didn't expect to feel such a connection. But the way the poem opens with lineage, history, and heroic memory reminded me of how we tell stories too. Storytelling has always been central in Indigenous communities, and it's not just about entertainment, it's about how we pass on values and responsibilities and even identity. So, Beowulf started as an oral poem, and it passed down generations of Anglo Saxon storytelling long before it was written down. These stories weren't just told for fun, they were often communal memory passed along by voice to teach about bravery, about lineage, about honor, and about survival. And much like Indigenous oral traditions, they were deeply rooted in place, community, and values. But when a Christian monk finally wrote down the version that we have today, which was sometime around the 10th or 11th century, something shifted. The story became fixed, it became reflected with new values, and it changed the poetry's purpose forever. Beowulf isn't alone. We also have the Odyssey, the Iliad from ancient Greece, and the Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia. Some of these are the oldest stories in the world that we have written out. And these were epic poems in, in epic scope. And they were filled with gods and monsters and battles and moral codes. And they helped people understand their place in the world and reminded people what it meant to be good and strong and loyal and honorable. They were poetry with a purpose, meant to be remembered. Epic poems were usually long, filled with rhythm and repetition, and they were meant to be performed out loud. So you can hear it in lines like, "So, the spear danes and days gone by." These structures made them easier to memorize and recite. But more importantly, they weren't about the individual, they were about the collective. And these stories reminded communities who they were and where they came from. And once poetry became written down, I feel like it started to shift. It became something that you read alone, not something that you heard in a gathering or like saw as a performance. It also started reflecting individual thoughts more than like the collective values. In Beowulf, we see this blend of pagan honor and Christian humility clash and overlap because Beowulf prays to a god, but also boasts about pagan fashion and being a warrior and the pagan values. So it made me wonder, what did this poem look like if it hadn't been written by a pagan, if it hadn't been written by a Christian monk? Like, what would that look like? I would love to go back in time and actually listen to the original pagan version of Beowulf. I find that fascinating. So, what was Beowulf's inner conflict? That question followed me throughout the poem. Beowulf started out obsessed with glory, with fame, with his legacy through that glory and fame. And he wanted immortality through that fame. So, at the end of the poem, he's really just thinking about his people, his kingdom, and what kind of legacy he's leaving behind. And that really struck me because it reminded me of this conversation that I had with my dad, who told me that it's not about how much money you make or how much praise you get. It's about making peace with yourself and your faith and making sure that your children are cared for and that they have something left behind for them. And that moment really brought the poem out from the past to my present. And I saw Beowulf not just as a warrior or a legend, but as a real man, full of contradiction and wisdom at the very end of his life. So today's poetry looks a little bit different. It still matters just as much, though. It's often shorter, it's very emotionally raw. And you see it on Instagram captions, on TikTok, spoken word, memes, even text messages. It's not like an epic length anymore, but it's still epic in purpose, I guess. And it captures our pain, our joy, our healing, Modern poetry is deeply personal. It focuses on individuals' truth, identity, trauma, love, survival. I've read poems that felt like a single breath from someone's soul. And in that breath, there's connection. That's what poetry does. It reaches out and says, hey, you're not alone in this. Poetry today isn't just about kings and monsters, it's about us as individuals, our stories, our emotions, our resilience. It's still a way to preserve our culture and pass down truths, though. It might just be posted instead of performed like it was back then. And even though poetry looks different now, it still holds that power, the rhythm, the emotional raw truth, the connection to culture and memory. Whether it's Beowulf or a two-line post on TikTok, poetry is still a bridge between generations, between worlds, and between who we are and who we're becoming. So I ask you, what poem stories or songs have stuck with you? And what do they teach you about who you are, who your ancestors were, and if you were to write a poem today, what would it say? So masicho, which means thank you in my language. And I hope this helped you see poetry not just as writing, but as a living tradition that connects us to the past and helps us tell the truth and about the present. Masi.